Welcome back. Let's talk about environmental factors that go into shaping wildfires. I just realized this. I have like a accent when I say wildfires. So, can you think of any environmental factors that could shape the behavior of a wildfire? So, what in nature could somehow affect the chance of a wildfire occurring, or if it is occurring, shape the behavior of it? Can you think of any environmental factors? Because that's what we're going to talk about. There are three factors to help understand and predict wildfire behavior, and those are the fuel, stuff that's burning, topography, the terrain of the land, and weather. It's those three things. So we'll break each of those down. So fuel for a fire typically includes leaves, twigs, decaying material, grass, shrubs, trees, logs, bushes, whatever. Fuel size affects ignition and movement, meaning smaller stuff like leaves and grasses, that kind of burns real quick. And that stuff can ignite very quickly, whether it's naturally or human caused. And again, stuff like grasses can burn real quick, so that can cause the movement of the fire to move very rapidly. Whereas bigger things like trees and logs, they don't tend to ignite very easily. They would need a lot of energy, maybe a lightning strike, something like that. And without some of these other factors, might move a little bit slower. So that's fuel. So depending on what's available to burn, that will kind of shape the behavior of the wildfire. Topography, so the terrain. It turns out that drier fuels that burn more easily are found on south-facing slopes in the northern hemisphere, up where we are. We are north of the equator, therefore we're in the northern hemisphere. So any slope that's facing south is exposed more so to the overhead sunlight. If a slope up here, like say in Arizona, is facing north, well, the sunlight doesn't typically hit. The sunlight's coming from the backside and might not be hitting that northern slope. So just depending on which direction a hill, slope, mountain is oriented could determine some wildfire behaviors. It also comes down to what slopes are exposed to the prevailing winds. Wind blows in different directions in different areas. Typically around here, the wind comes from the southwest up into Avondale area, typically. But depending on the terrain, mountains and valleys and latitudes and a number of different factors, different locations, wind goes in different directions. So it depends on, is a slope exposed to prevailing winds. It also turns out that mountains and mountainous areas circulate winds up canyons during daytime and then down canyons during nighttime as warm air heats up and rises, and it cools down and it tends to sink. And oftentimes you find a lot of wildfires more so in mountainous areas. It just tends to be a little bit more windy, a little bit more dry, a little bit more exposed to the sun. So the topography plays a big part. You can get it in flat areas, but they don't tend to really, go too far or expand very quickly. Excuse me. Another thing that the terrain will do is that wildfires will preheat fuels upslope, making it easier to spread. Right? So let's say you have a mountain and you got a fire down here at the bottom. Well, heat rises. Well, that heat's going to travel up the mountain. Heat rises. Heat's going to travel up the mountain, kind of drying things out ahead of time. So as that fire creeps up the slope, it's already encountering dried out material, making it easier to burn. So, type of fuel, what's to burn, topography, the terrain, two big factors, and the third being weather. Weather has the dominant influence on a wildfire. Temperature, precipitation, humidity, and definitely wind. So temperatures. Hotter means drier conditions. more wildfires. Precipitation, rain or lack of precipitation, drier, more wildfires. Relative humidity, how much moisture, that's a measurement of how much moisture is in the air. Higher humidity, more moisture in the air. Low humidity, less moisture in the air, more that gets sucked out of the ground and plants. Dry conditions, more wildfires. And wind. Wind blowing dries things out, but also once a fire starts, wind can blow a wildfire for hundreds of miles all around. Obviously, wildfires are very common following droughts, long spells of lack of, or very long spells of low precipitation. For instance, here in Arizona, we've been in about a drought for the last 20 years, hence all the wildfires. The wind direction and the strength, again, will help preheat unburnt materials, especially when you're coupling it with the topography and the terrain. Plus, even though there's a wildfire at this location, if strong winds are blowing, might blow a little spark, a little ember, a little burning ash, even, hundreds of feet or even a mile or so away, and you can start a fire in front of that little spot fire, in front of the main fire. It just causes the wildfire to move that much quicker. And then obviously with everything going on, climate change, can't forget about. So climate change, what we found climate change to do is increase the intensity and frequency of whatever you experience. So with climate change, what we're finding is that wetter places get wetter, meaning, like for instance, Florida. Florida gets hurricanes. They're getting more hurricanes. They're getting bigger and more frequent. Whereas in Arizona, we're dry. We're only getting drier. So our droughts are getting more intense and lasting for longer. So places with wildfires, they're becoming more wildfires, and they're becoming bigger and deadlier, more destructive as well. So climate change is affecting all things climate related, and wildfires have a big tie to weather. So because of climate change, we're really making the problem of wildfires much, much worse. Because, with climate change, we're talking about changes in temperature, precipitation, all plays a part in creating more wildfires. Hotter temperatures, lower humidity, drier conditions. As we're changing the climate, we're also changing the material that lives there. So, as locations warm up, there may be some plants and trees that can't tolerate that higher temperatures. So we get these higher temperature material moving in, where there was lush forest, now we get grasslands, which are a little bit more heat tolerant, replacing forests, creating much more fuel, because that stuff can dry out quickly, it can burn quickly. Yeah, good old climate change. And if we're also with climate change, if we do have more storms, that means more chances of lightning. Therefore, couple that with drier conditions, so more sparks to create the wildfires. Climate change, fantastic. So here's the annual number of acres, that's the area, burned in wildfires for the past 40 plus years, excuse me. As you can see, it's definitely increasing. Most of that due to climate change. Some of it due to people moving and recreating where they probably shouldn't. But yeah, this is a direct cause of climate change. You can see the lower numbers of acreage burned versus what we're getting into. It's double, 2.5 times what it was 40 years ago. So let's go ahead and pause here, and when we come back, good conversation to have. Well, how the heck do wildfires get started? What causes them? That's what we'll talk about when we get back. See you then.